So city workers voted to authorize a 3-day strike, 15th through the 17th. Immediate reaction to that?
Well, it's disappointing. We have a contract in place with a majority of our bargaining units. We just came to agreements with 4 other bargaining units, and these unions have been holdouts, and unfortunately, after an initial mediation meeting, walked out without putting a substantive offer on the table in terms of what we might do differently. The truth is, going beyond the 5% that we've agreed to with all of our other bargaining units, which, by the way, is the same level that the county has agreed to with its bargaining units, going any farther requires some pretty painful trade-offs. We can potentially squeeze another 1/4 to 0.5% out by doing no special adjustments, meaning that any employees for the rest of the year where we see a high vacancy rate or we think that we're out of market, we won't be able to make adjustments. That's what's left in that pot of money that we've already used to get to 5%. Beyond that, we're looking at reducing library hours, hiring fewer police officers, paving fewer miles of roads. We offer essential services that our residents rely on. And I fully appreciate and in no way want to dismiss the frustration of workers who are trying to survive in a very expensive place. I grew up in a union household. I grew up in a family that was paycheck to paycheck. I know that every dollar matters. And the reality is, in Silicon Valley, there has not been any ability for us to have wages keep up with the cost of housing. And that's because we're not building enough housing. And so as a separate issue, we need to reduce and remove barriers to building housing. We need to make it much easier and faster and cheaper to build housing to control costs. But going beyond 5% means tough trade-offs. And unfortunately, I haven't heard anyone suggest what those trade-offs should be. I'm not willing to cut core services to make unsustainable increases. Not to mention just one other thing. There's the salary increase, 5% versus the 7% folks are asking for. That's $14.5 million we would have to find in current services that we would have to cut. The other piece of this is our unfunded pension liabilities. We just have turned the corner after a very long and painful process of trying to get control of the $4 billion in unfunded pension liabilities we have as a city. We don't want to start growing that unfunded liability again, and this would also do that. So we have to be fair to everybody. We have to be fair to our workers, who I have a lot of respect for. We also have to be fair to our residents and taxpayers, and we have to do what is fiscally responsible over time, not make one-off decisions that are actually unsustainable.
I have 2 quick questions because I know your time's limited. One, we just heard the press conference that they had. One of the things that they said is they feel like by you saying, in order to increase wages, you were going to take, other services, or it could affect, we have to find other ways to cut those costs. They feel like you're pinning residents against workers. What is your response to that?
Well, I mean, frankly, it's math. I would love to increase services and give 7% raises. If the money was there, that's exactly what we would do. We would expand services and give a 7% raise, an 8% raise. It really comes down to the resources that we have. We have a set amount of revenue that comes in, and just like people have to balance their own household budgets, we're not allowed to print money. We can't borrow to increase wages. We have a set amount of money, and we have to decide how to allocate it. This year, even though we normally project a 3% raise in our budget when we project out, we've pulled together the dollars to offer a 5% raise, which again is in line with what all of our other bargaining units have agreed to. It's in line with what the county just agreed to with SEIU. It's aggressive, and it's the max we can do without starting to face some painful trade-offs. If the bargaining units want to tell us what trade-off they suggest, I'm all ears. If they think there's a way to give them a higher wage without reducing services, let's talk about that. But they've yet to produce any data that would indicate that that's possible. Our budget office is independent, it's professional, and the math is inarguable. It's just numbers. And I know there's a lot of emotion, I know there's a lot of frustration. I understand people are commuting from farther and farther away because they can't afford to live here. But going beyond 5% means cutting something. And the better answer to our cost of living issues, though it's not immediately satisfying to any of us, is that we've got to build a lot more housing and get control of our housing costs that have been going up faster and faster than wages for years. And I understand a lot of people are at a breaking point. I get that. I was a super commuter myself. I did 4 hours a day round trip on a bus to come to San Jose because we couldn't afford to live here. So I know what our workers are going through, and that's why we're being aggressive and offering 5%, which is where everybody else has gotten to this year, recognizing that high cost of living. But again, the math is the math. I don't know how to go farther without us agreeing on what we're going to cut.
Last question. I wanted to ask, obviously, 3-day strike, these are many workers. These unions represent around 4,500 workers. Do you have any fears with that, with 3-day strike? What are potentially some of the risks with that, if you see any?
Well, there's no doubt that a large-scale strike will have an impact on services for our residents, which is unfortunate. I think the right answer is to go back to mediation. Our bargaining units that are these bargaining units that have held out really didn't take mediation seriously, unfortunately. We had one meeting and they walked out without offering any significant movement or creative ideas. I've suggested, for example, that in years 2 and 3, if the revenue is higher than we project, we should automatically give a higher raise. We could have a trigger that says, hey, there's more money than we expected, let's give you a higher raise. But we can't actually agree on that kind of solution unless we're talking and we're back in the mediation process. So that's really where we need to go, is back to mediation. We are prepared for a strike. We've been planning to mitigate the impact. There are some essential roles that would be exempt from the strike, and where necessary, we'll have to contract out certain services. But there's no doubt it will have a negative impact on the community, which is why it's so disappointing that we're at this point rather than back at the mediation table having a second and a third meeting to figure out how we can get closer to one another.
One thing I heard them mentioning, because they mentioned that you guys have been using the county comparison, that it's similar to an offer from the county, but I guess they were quick to point out that the difference is the ancillary services, the healthcare, and a bunch of the other things that I guess under previous administration were cut quite a bit and not to the degree of what county offers, and that might be something on the table if they can't get more money to get more of like the medical and dental, whatever. I don't know the exact details. But
well, to that point, we, as part of this, we aren't just offering a 5% raise. We're also offering 3 additional weeks of paid parental leave. And we're always up for talking about other benefits. But again, there's still just cost. At the end of the day, we have to make the numbers balance out. That 5% isn't just what the county has agreed to with SEIU. It's what a majority of our bargaining units have agreed to. It's where all of our other bargaining units are for this fiscal year.